You're listening to Making a Living Show. I'm Roby Levy.
Hi, I'm Tash, and I make photographs for a living.
Tash Damjanovic is a fine art photographer based in Canada. After a successful career and raising a family of 5, she's gone on to exhibit internationally, and her work has been recognized by the likes of the Julia Margaret Cameron Awards, the International Photography Awards, and the Tokyo International Photo Awards. Here's my chat with Tash Damjanovic. Who are you and what do you make for a living?
So my name is Tash Damjanovic, and I'm a fine art photographer. I've been doing this for over 2 decades, and this is the way I find my calm.
Well, how'd you get started photographing? Photographing. That's the word. That's what we're looking for. Right. How did you get started photographing?
So I was inspired actually in high school. In my last year, I did a co-op and found, I was in a natural history museum back in Belgrade where I grew up in Serbia. And the department that I worked in had a gentleman, a photographer that was really well-known and had traveled all over the country taking amazing photographs. Nobody else wanted to go out. Actually, he was collecting specimens of all kinds of, plants and flowers and whatnot. And nobody else wanted to go out. So he went out and he started photographing that for work. And then that grew into a whole other photography practice. And I was inspired by his images. And he's now one of the most well-known photographers in Serbia. And that's what got me started. And that was my first entry into the darkroom. Oh my goodness. I can't tell you what a thrill that was to go into the dark and just see an image appear. So I started, the old-fashioned way, and I did print a lot of my images. Now it's, I work more in digital, but that thrill of being in the darkroom and seeing something appear out of nothing just has never left me.
You're not just somebody who's taking pictures. You're a fine art photographer. And I'm kind of curious, what's the difference between someone who snaps shots to somebody who is a fine art photographer? What makes it fine art?
That's a really good question. And, I've also listened to how other photographers and fine art photographers answer that. And really, I would say the best distinction that I've heard is one in which the message of the photograph is not literal, and instead you're seeing one thing, but you're talking about something that is a little bit different. So you're elevating the conversation from the individual to maybe something that is more broader or maybe even universal. So that's how I would position it, really, as taking the conversation, starting the conversation with something specific about the photograph, but not ending it there.
Give me an example of that, because I've seen in some of your work, you focus on nature, and in some of your work, you focus on the elements seem to be a sort of a major component, but you also do figures. You do nudes and body work. What is it you're trying to say with your work?
So the primary goal of my photography, one is it's very personal to me, and that is I do really use it to find my calm, find my space in which, I can exist outside of time and space, if you will. What I'm trying to do is capture moments that are fleeting, that show some sort of vulnerability and some sort of magnificence at the same time. I don't necessarily decide, I'm going to be a landscape photographer and I'm going to do portraits. And within fine art, there are a variety of different areas within which you could create. But if you look at what's the common thread, so for example, my landscape images are of sailboats. These are boats that were sailing in Toronto. They were actually competing, but they look as if they're suspended in time. There's very little reference to this being a city, and it's celebrating the wind and the human I guess, willingness to and ability to overcome challenges. That particular day, in which I took many of the images, was the weather was just horrible. It was raining. It was foggy. The winds were severe. They nearly stopped the race, but they kept going. They made it through, and they, in my mind, they triumphed. And so I wanted to show, how do you photograph the wind, this amazing force, and a human ability to overcome it. So that when we talk about fine art, that's what I'm referring to, that you look at the photograph and you think, well, that's a picture of two boats. Very nice. Maybe there are a couple of birds in there. Isn't that pretty? But what I'm trying to get at is how to photograph the invisible, how to photograph that power of this force of nature and the human ability to overcome it or work with it or let it work for us.
What led you to be so interested in this type of subject matter? This idea of photographing and displaying what's effectively not there?
It was not intentional. I didn't kind of think about it at home and then go out and find it. It was really just being open to what's around me. And just to kind of give another example of that would be the figures. So I started photographing mannequins. Much of what you see, if you don't see a face, chances are on my website, that is a mannequin. And that was my entry into photographing the human figure. I have since graduated, quote unquote, to real humans. But what I was looking for there is, again, what's the fragility of the human body, and those mannequins are photographed as if they were fragile human beings. Meanwhile, those particular ones are made with a very new process, and they are virtually indestructible. They're recyclable, but they're indestructible. So that was my take on, again, human fragility, and looking at how can we become unbreakable. What does that mean for us? We're not mannequins. Excuse me. We're not mannequins, and we're not, made of something indestructible. So what does that mean in our context? So it was really, I think, following that strength, vulnerability, resilience vector. That's kind of been the overarching theme within my work. So while they seem to appear very different, landscape and figurative and portrait work, what does that have in common? I think it has that in common. And even when I'm photographing, let's say, some of the flowers, or I'm looking for a human figure. I'm looking for the elements of what's fleeting, what's fragile, and what can overcome that.
You said that you don't normally think of an idea or think of a concept and then go out and execute it. It sort of more organically finds you. But do you ever find yourself without ideas, like without inspiration? Like, do you just pull out the camera and go walking and hope that something hits you? Is that how you kind of find your way to these things?
Well, okay, so that's a really good question. There are certain times a day, and there's certain places in which I find inspiration more easily. So, I will tend to go to those places. I love the water, so the beach. I love the Toronto Botanical Gardens. I love downtown city escapes where there are people who aren't really aware of what else is going around them, and I can photograph figures freely. So I find those to be much easier places to find ideas. But I do worry that I won't have ideas. It's never happened that I don't, but just in case, I have a list of projects and a list of ideas that I want to photograph. And so I just keep adding to that. And so at any given time, I have plenty to work with.
What is it about photography itself that became the interesting medium to you? I mean, what draws you to it?
What I love about photography is it is grounded in reality. So, these days, digitally, you could create things you could, draw digitally and create something that does not actually exist. But the way I use photography, it is always grounded in something that is real. And so by using the different levers that photography offers, for example, the quality of the light, the perspective, and as well as some editing and post-processing, I'm able to use reality as a springboard. But there is always, and I don't usually add things into my photographs. I will take away, but I won't add. So that's what I really like about it, is that you have this limitation that I've self-imposed on myself, which is I'm going to start with something real. And no matter what else I do, that still stands.
I was noticing that you've been featured in a number of magazines, on the news, various forms of media coverage. How are these people finding you?
Well, yeah, it's changed a little bit due to the COVID pandemic, but I did quite a few shows. I did outdoor shows. I did indoor shows across North America, and I'm about to have an exhibit in Barcelona, Spain. So these are opportunities. You do have to apply to them. There's a jury. They look for a certain, level of professionalism and artistic talent to get in. And then with the pandemic, I've looked for other opportunities because those shows all basically went away. Those opportunities went away. And so I have been entering competitions, most recently, even with my book. So you can enter into, let's say, single image or series of photographs, or even book competitions. So I've been doing that more recently, and that has given me incredible exposure. I was really pleased with the recognition most recently of the book, Beautiful Body, Unbreakable Spirit, winning second place at the International Photography Awards. And this is a huge competition worldwide. They actually, in better times, they would have Carnegie Hall as the place for all the award winners to get together from across the world. It will still be online. So that was just, I didn't realize how much of an opportunity that sort of platform would be. And so, yeah, I've been doing that quite a bit more recently.
What sort of things has that opened up for you?
I think it has given me an opportunity to speak with people that I normally wouldn't have a chance to connect with, both creatively as well as people in marketing and people that are in industry that are looking for other projects. And also, if I have a project in mind and I'm approaching someone, it just adds to that conversation to be able to say that that I'm an award-winning photographer.
Yeah, it never hurts to have award-winning before your name, right?
Right.
So tell me about Beautiful Body, Unbreakable Spirit. This is an interesting project.
This book is, it took about 2 years to create. It is published by Internat Canada, which is a fine lingerie company. And they have, for years, supported breast cancer survivors because they have a lingerie line that's specifically dedicated to breast cancer survivors. So Olivia Leroux, who is the sales and marketing director there, came across my photographic work and approached me to do this book. And they really wanted to take their sponsorship of the Dragon Boat breast cancer survivor teams to a whole other level. And so she explained what she was looking to do. And I was over the moon excited to do something like this. So this is my first book. And so we very quickly, that was December 2019, we got talking. And by January, we were in the studio doing the photo shoots. And we were able to get everything done just before the pandemic hit. This is a book that celebrates women who have had breast cancer and who took up dragon boat racing as part of their recovery. And it features 7 women. It is what's really special about this and why this is a uniquely Canadian story is 25 years ago, it was unheard of for breast cancer survivors who had surgery to engage in strenuous upper body activity. That was considered off limits. But, when you take off strenuous body activity, that could mean picking up your child. This is pretty big to have that limitation in your life. And so 25 years ago, Dr. Don McKenzie from University of British Columbia ran an experiment with breast cancer survivors, and they picked a dragon boat instead of a canoe. I think he was the official doctor for the Canadian Olympic rowing team. But he took, for the breast cancer survivors, he took a dragon boat because it was considered more stable, less likely to tip. And it fits 20 people. So he ran this experiment and found that not only was there very little risk of negative outcomes, but it was very beneficial to women to engage in this sport. And beyond just exercise alone, these were women that were literally and figuratively in the same boat, right?
Yeah.
So, and through that experiment have opened up a whole new way to be after breast cancer that was much less life-limiting. And as a result, there are over 50 teams in Canada and 230 teams across the world that now do this. So this book is coming out basically on the 25th anniversary of that experiment.
What was it like to make the book? What was it like to photograph these women, hear their stories, speak with them, and try to find ways to photograph them, to portray them?
Well, this was a really personal journey for me because, as I mentioned, I was photographing primarily mannequins that were made in the image of a quote unquote some perfect human, right? So for me to move from photographing these manufactured bodies to photographing real women who are in their 40s, 50s, and 80s was a challenge, and it was one that I really wanted to take on. I wanted to see, how would I do this? How would I, everybody's got their own take on things. So it was a little bit scary, I will say, but it was just so fulfilling. And what was really wonderful about Anita, the sponsor, is that they didn't rush me. I told them, look, the way I know they worked with fashion photographers previously, where you can put on 20 outfits in 3 hours, and it's 10 minutes per outfit, and you just go next, and that's it. Well, I told them my process is very slow. I worked with each woman, and there were 7 of them, 4 hours each, and we would, give them certain props, and I would photograph them and really look for that special moment and look for that moment in which they showed that they were comfortable with their bodies and with their new bodies, if you will, the changed bodies, and they were in lingerie, so they were quite vulnerable through this process too, and very trusting of me to be able to come out and go through this journey with me.
Now, as a photographer who primarily worked with plastic mannequins before, how were you the one were you selected? Did you pitch this idea? Like, how did this come to pass that you were the one who was going to photograph when they have, let's be fair, all of these different photographers out there that they're probably more used to using? Why were you selected?
Well, I actually, so I knew of Anita, and I asked them if I could borrow some of their product to put on the mannequins. And just experiment. Really, I was creating a body of work and preparing for, what would be the next show. And so that's how I got to talk to them about it. And I mentioned, I'm a fine art photographer. This is my website. Let me know if I could, borrow something. It's just going on mannequins, and this will be back to you in no time. And they saw my work and they really loved it. I think it embodied in them. They saw the potential of what could be a project that I do in my own style using real humans.
When you're talking about people's health conditions, and you're talking to people about stuff that's intensely personal, and you're asking them to share with you, are you ever worried about stepping over a line or stepping into a world where you are, shall we say, a tourist? Are you worried about being deemed a tourist, literally with a camera on?
Part of it is my process that I'm not snapping. I'm not like a tourist. Typically, is someone who will ride on the bus, hop out of the bus for 10 minutes, get back on the bus and you have your photograph, right? That's exactly what I'm not trying to do. I am trying to sit there, be with it, be with them, whoever, it is that I'm photographing, understand it, learn something new. And hopefully it's a discovery process for me. Find something that is captivating and that is unique and that I can cover in my own unique way.
Do you have a team? Is there somebody hauling your gear or somebody who's setting up your shoots for you?
Not regularly, no. I've had people help out. Definitely my family's been really great. My husband, especially when we're doing landscapes. But usually I try not to take too much gear. For the book, for example, I did have a lot of different things. I was not sure until we got to the set, which props, which backgrounds would be a good fit. I did quite a bit of preparation for each, the shoot with each woman. So I did select, for example, the lingerie. I selected, we had hats and pearls and scarves and things like that. And then the Studio Bon Soleil that we used had so many different areas to it that you could really make unique portraits that were separate from every other portrait and different. So in that case, I really did like a lot of stuff, and it wasn't just gear. And everybody helped out. We did have the models, and there was Olivia and Marie from Studio Bon Soleil, and we all kind of were carrying stuff up and down a few flights. So that was a huge help. But I try not to get bogged down in too much gear. I really think it's more about the art of seeing than about the technical stuff. I'm not one of these photographers that talks too much about all the technical things that go into it. I have a background in it. I've studied it, but my interest is in really like the emotional aspects of a photograph and those insights, not so much the technical.
And speaking of the emotional sides of things, what did the women who were the subjects in the book, what's their response been to seeing themselves in these photos?
It's been overwhelmingly positive, and the emails that I've received and the thank yous and the conversations we've had. I mean, they didn't see any of the images until we did a little book reveal just a couple months before launch. It was overwhelming, and it was absolutely wonderful. And what was great, I talked only about the studio, but I went out there and photographed them dragon boat racing. And I'm not a sports photographer. And so the challenge there was, how do I cover this without looking like it's coming from a sports photographer? And so, in the book, you see that there are these, cityscapes, and with them, and it's like a silhouette boat. And you see Eleanor, the drummer, screaming out. So these are the sorts of things that I wanted to capture. That was, again, more lyrical. It was a way to cover a a sport that is different from what you would traditionally think of.
What are you doing for this book specifically? How is it getting promoted, and what are you doing to help it get seen?
So this book has had so much coverage. I have to just be so grateful. I mean, we all are doing things to help promote it. So I'm working very closely with Anita, and we have a PR professional that is helping us work on this book and getting it out there. But during the month of October, Breast Cancer Awareness Month, we've been on CBC and CTV and Global News and CP24 and Globe and Mail and et cetera, et cetera. Cheryl Pounder, who is a 2-time gold Olympic medalist and whose mom had breast cancer and did dragon boating, has written the foreword for it. So she's been really helpful as well. And then the women themselves were really, it's a team effort to get the word out. I mean, it's such a busy place, the world is. And October, Breast Cancer Awareness Month, is usually quite busy with a lot of different things happening around this subject. So I'm just really pleased with all the coverage that we've received. And I think the fact that, while it is $60, all of it goes back to fundraising for these women. And I think as a coffee table book, for example, if you were to use it as that, it's a continuous inspiration of how life can be really energizing and beautiful and fulfilling despite the challenges you may be facing.
Well, what sort of advice do you have for people who may want to get into photography, fine art, or otherwise for that matter?
I think photography these days, the cost of entry is very low. So anybody really can get into it. I think what's really important, though, is if you want to treat it as something special that tells a story and that tells something about you personally, is to really open your eyes and look for what inspires you, and then take that journey, see where it goes. It's very hard to pre-plan, I think, a lot of things that are creative, or it may be more formulaic, and it may be more kind of template oriented and stale if you're just kind of thinking it through, planning it and going into it, I find, for me. So my advice is get started. There's nothing to wait for. There's no better time. I certainly, it took me a long time to get to use my time more effectively in creating images. It would, I kept using the excuse, well, I'm not in the mood. And I mean, I let myself use that excuse, I guess, is the better way to phrase it. I'm not in the mood. This is not, the right subject. This is not the right time. And over time, you just realize, you know what, just go do it. I mean, you might have heard Jerry Seinfeld say, I write, I think it's 2 hours a day or whatever it is, every single day. And it's a practice. And so if I do that, well, eventually I'll come up with something good. So just keep at it. So I think of it more like that, which is keep it alive, keep moving forward, keep exploring what you find interesting, and something will come of it, guaranteed.
Tash, where can people find out more about you?
So my website is tashdamjanovic, like David, .art. And then the book website is beautifulunbreakable.com, as well as Instagram, tashdamjanovic, and beautiful_unbreakable.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show and sharing with us how you make a living.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate that.
Subscribe to Making a Living Show on Apple, Google, Spotify, Stitcher, and pretty much anywhere else you get your podcasts. For more on the show, visit makingalivingshow.com and follow along on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. Making a Living Show is produced by Next Exit Media and hosted by me, Roby Levy. Thanks for listening.